Well, good afternoon. My name is Nathan Stelter, president here at the Stelter Company, and thanks for joining us for our webinar today, the Autobiographical Interview. I'll get to introducing our special guests in just a minute, but first I want to say a couple quick words around the webinar series that hopefully many of you are already familiar with. But as a trusted leader in asset-based giving, the Stelter Company is passionate about supporting nonprofits with ongoing fresh ideas and practical guidance. We're proud to help build connections as well across the sector and are pleased to offer this series of free webinars every year, bringing you experts like Jim from across the country to help unlock new revenue throughout your development portfolio. Today's webinar is actually our fourth in our 2025 webinar series. Some presenters and topics still to come this year include Delinda Rood and Karen Peel of the Mayo Clinic, teaching us how to pivot to turn planned gift inquiries into planned gifts. And then next, actually Thursday, September 4th, as you see on the screen, we've got a special treat, a panel discussion led by our own Lynn Gomer, who's senior gift planning consultant here, as well as a member of the National Board of CGP. She's going to join our client strategists, and they're going to unpack the insights from the recent Giving USA 2025 report, really exploring what the data means for your individual sector and your fundraising strategy. So please keep an eye on your inbox for your personal invitations to register for those as we get closer to that date. And as always, if you have missed any of the webinars from earlier this year or past years, you can see those at stelter.com/webinars. Now back to today's webinar. I have the pleasure, as I mentioned earlier, of introducing the renowned Jim Langley, president of Langley Innovations. Honestly, it's been one of the ones I've been looking forward to the most this year, and do appreciate Jim giving his time and talent and treasure for the group today. But as you can see, Jim is, if you're not familiar with him, he's pioneered a number of practices that have been emulated by hundreds of institutions around the country. The knowledge he acquired from conceiving and conducting three path-breaking campaigns at three major institutions, and the insight he gleaned from decades of research on donor behavior has been shared in 5 books, dozens of articles, hundreds of blog posts, and scores of seminars, workshops, and speeches. And if you don't follow him on LinkedIn, you can always gain some really great insights there as well. But as a result, Jim's expertise and insight, particularly on how institutions can adapt best to changing and unchanging philanthropic realities, he's highly sought after by institutions and professional advancement organizations around the world. So very excited to hand over the reins to Jim for the next hour of discussion. And thank you, Jim, for being with us.
Thank you, Nathan. Appreciate the invitation. I appreciate all that you're doing for our field. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope it's afternoon or midday, wherever you are, but I'm very happy to join you and hope to be of service to you. I think the topic at hand is one that we would be remiss if we didn't discuss, because when you look at demographics, the largest portion of donors, of giving families and giving households, is in the elderly, and I'm one of them, and that we are more and more reflecting on what we do with our life's earnings, and we reflect on what life and career taught us, and therefore how can we transfer those lessons and values through our estate giving to worthy institutions. And so it's a profoundly reflective time for people like me and my generation. And that, I think, is a clue to all of us that if we are to engage people at this stage in life in this very reflective period, the best way to prepare for that is for us to become more reflective ourselves. And that can be done simply by reflecting on what our lives and careers have taught us to this date, no matter what age we might be, and thinking about some of the most important lessons we've gleaned from our career, from the work that we've done in philanthropy, and say to ourselves, how can we bring our native curiosity and those career lessons and life lessons to the dialogue that we want to have with people in this very reflective stage of life, and in this period when an amount of wealth will be transferred in the next 10 or 15 years that we'll never see the likes of again, because we have a very large generation with relatively broadly distributed wealth, with relative loyalty toward various institutions. I say relative because all those factors are more significant among this generation and within this generation so far, in terms of giving to institutions, in terms of loyalty to institutions, And as we'll see, loyalty to institutions, particularly loyalty over several decades, will be predictive of where estates are directed during the great wealth transfer. So as we think about engaging with people at this stage in life, reflective people, we think about how we can become more reflective. And that is perhaps not only through our own personal exercises, as I suggested, but turning to people who we can learn from. You may have your own writers, and please recommend them to us. But David Brooks is the kind of writer that I admire because he's deeply reflective. He does a lot of good research. And one of his books, that most recent books, is How to Know a Person. And I'd recommend that for anybody in the fundraising field or the philanthropy field because he engages in his own personal reflection about his life and talks about career consolidation and how at this point he realizes, well, he has a degree of comfort about who he is. He has a degree of financial comfort. Those factors have sent him in to a deeper phase about what he chooses to do with the rest of his life. And also in that book, David has lots of research and lots of practical tips, including taking terms that we use very often, like empathy, and talking about how you can actually work on empathy, how you can actually structure empathy, the stages of empathy. And of course, that's incredibly important to one of the most important tools that we have, and that's listening, deep listening. But David Brooks raises a profoundly important question for all of us in this field, particularly those of us, which is the significant majority, who are expected to sort of abide by certain metrics, to meet certain goals. And unfortunately, those goals are all too often short term. The great irony is, of course, in the wealth transfer, what we'll see is the benefit of long term relationships, as I mentioned earlier. What we'll see in the next 10 or 15 years is the power of long relationships now redounding to the effect of many institutions, even though those institutions didn't always value the building of those relationships. And in some cases, those donors remained loyal despite relatively small amounts of attention from those institutions because they were obsessed with short-term goals. But here is the season, and it will be plentiful, and it'll be fascinating to watch how that wealth is distributed. But look at Brooks's question. Do we live for our resume or for our eulogy? Now, to talk about a eulogy for those of you out there in your 20s, 30s, or 40s might seem awfully premature and maybe a bit mawkish, but I think it's a wonderful question. Where do you want to be at the end of the days, your days? What do you want people to say about you? What do you want people who you respect to say about you? What do you want people who you love and they love you? What do you want them to say? I can tell you in my own career, having a sense of where I wanted to end up was incredibly important in guiding me through difficult moments, through high pressure moments where I kept going back, asking myself, who are you? Where do you want to be? And what do you want to be able to say when it's all said and done? So, how do we live for our eulogy? We start thinking about how we treat people. We start thinking more seriously about relationships. And perhaps even in the face of great pressure, we can say to ourselves, no, I've gotten this far believing in who I am. I've gotten this far by being true to my own principles and beliefs and notwithstanding the chaos and pressure around me. I'm going to continue on that path. Many of you who know me know that my favorite definition of leadership comes down to 6 words: absorb chaos, project calm, give hope. I think those 6 words are going to become more meaningful in the decade ahead. Absorb chaos, project calm, and give hope. I think it's great advice for nonprofit leaders, for philanthropic leaders, for fundraisers, for people working on estate gifts. Absorb chaos, project calm, give hope. If we don't project calm and belief in the future of our institutions, will we engender support? If we don't give hope, how are we going to fuel philanthropy and how are we going to cause people to believe that if they give to and through us, they can greatly affect the paths of future generations? So this is a great time for deep reflection and in a field that sometimes forces us into a reactive mode that tries to accelerate the important things we do. This is a time to reorient ourselves to our great purposes and to who we want to be. Another worthy reflection, if we're now in our own deepening exercise, comes from John O'Donohue. The way we present to each other is frequently superficial. By the way, I think that's so true in our field. Too many glib phrases, too many slick publications, too many sort of broad appeals and giving days and annual appeals, too much hyperbole. So we inadvertently present ourselves to our prospective donors as too superficial in my mind. And I think if you scan a lot of appeals, you'll see something very similar. But O'Donohue warns us of the consequences. When we deaden our depths, when we allow ourselves to become superficial, we will not resonate with those we meet and those we work with. So this is a very important phenomenon, is it not, in fundraising, is to say things, to bring up topics, to suggest directions and giving options that not just correspond to what our institutions want, but to resonate deeply with donors' values. Is that not what fundraising is at its best? An exquisite matchmaking exercise in which our aspirations resonate deeply with the life lessons of our donors. Again, some of you who know me will have heard this before, but I'll keep repeating it because it's true. If you read my resume, you'll see lots of impressive numbers in there because I worked with major institutions that had great resources, built tremendous reputations, and were able, by virtue of the good deeds they did and the impressive feats they performed, to attract significant amounts of support. But people read my resume and quote the dollars raised during my tenures. But I can tell you where I am today. What I am most proud of is being asked multiple times to give eulogies at donors' funerals. We say this is a relationship business. How do we know that the relationship works from both ends? How do we know that the donor is satisfied with the relationship when they go to a fundraiser of all people, or their surviving spouse does and says, in my case, it was all he wants you to speak for him. He believed that you knew him well. He believed that you understood him like few people do. And I took great satisfaction in that donors who gave so significantly to the organizations I represented remembered me and saw me that way, not as a gift chaser, not as a fundraiser with a short-term agenda, but someone who helped donors go through a self-discovery process to determine what was most important to them and then how to structure their philanthropy. And when I spoke for the people at their eulogies, the family told me that I captured their essence. So that again gave me great satisfaction. Not only did I hear what I hoped to hear from that person, but that I heard what was true and important to them, and I was able to articulate that to others. I think there's just too little of that in this field. And I think the more we work on that deep listening, on harnessing our curiosity, on hearing people at deeper levels, and working with them as a guide, as a facilitator, is the highest and best use of our talents. And by the way, the best form of fundraising. It is the form of fundraising over time that will yield the greatest results. So I try to do justice to the donors and do justice to the organizations I represented and find that match. But I was not the biographer. I was not listening and then going writing up material and coming back. I encouraged the people I work with to write their own biography, if not to write it down, to maybe think it through. And I gave them reflective questions to think about and said, you may conclude in this series of reflections that we are a legitimate claimant for your philanthropy, but you may find we are not, and you may find others, and that's fine. I'm a facilitator, and I believe in more instances than not that that facilitation has greatly redounded to the effect of the organizations I've worked for, but not always. And that also showed people that I was objective in trying to facilitate their philanthropic decision making. I had no technique, and there's a lot on LinkedIn, there's a lot of text, there's a lot of seminars on techniques, on tactics, and they have a place. But I try to come into my interviews, to my conversations with donors, with no technique, with nothing other than curiosity, thinking perhaps about the last conversation I had, something I knew about them, something I had read, and just coming in and saying, I was wondering, why did you do that? I mean, I'd ask very basic questions. Look what you achieved. Why did you work so hard? Did you sacrifice a lot? Do you think you sacrificed too much in the success that you achieved? Do you have any regrets? What would you say to others about what you did well and what you wish you could have done better? And people were sometimes surprised by the questions because they were to the point, but they saw in them somebody who was truly trying to understand. But in listening, I listened for those themes, and every once in a while I'd play it back. I think I see a pattern, I'd say. I hear you saying X, Y, or Z. Does this sound like a theme in your life? And people would often say yes and chuckle. And of course, people would say, Jim, until you asked me that question or those questions, I didn't realize that about myself. I just did an exercise yesterday to give you an example of the power of good questions. And I was at an independent school and working with the school heads and trying to encourage them to become more active in the relationship building with their current and prospective donors, saying, people want to meet with the service providers in the organizations, the doers, the heroes, the difference makers. And they had not heard that before. And so I was trying to tell them how important they were to the philanthropic equation. But I wanted to put them through a reflective exercise so that when they engaged in that exercise, they'd learn something about themselves, they'd share, but they'd also learn the power of good questions. So one of the questions I tried on them, what I had never asked before, it just popped up, was at what point, when you reflect back on your youth or childhood, as you reflect back, at what point did it become clear that you were going to become what you are today? What point in your youth or childhood did it become clear that you were going to become what you are today? I got some wonderful answers. I got some poignant answers. Someone said, who was a teacher, I remember grading papers with my mother, helping her grade papers, who was also a teacher, and how much joy I took in the grading of papers, how much I learned, how much I saw the personality of each person's work. And another person, again, I kept these anonymous, quite poignantly said, when I was 3 and realized I didn't fit in and they didn't explain, but there was something in me that wanted to reach out to that person and say, tell me more, right? And so when people hear us listening, see genuine concern, not just trying to jockey for a gift, they become, as you know, more expansive with us and provide more useful information to our facilitation. So it is an act of discovery and self-discovery that we take people through. We say, this is your story. Ask yourself these questions and reflect and share with me what you've learned. You may know of Jen Sheng and Adrian Sargent. They've done some very nice and important work on the psychology of philanthropy, and they too affirm the fact that donors are seeking to discover themselves through philanthropy. And I'll bet many of you listening today realize that sometimes you start with donors that aren't quite sure what their priorities are. They're not quite sure how to direct their philanthropy. So they start asking questions, they start looking at various possibilities. But when you work with them over time and you are a good listener and a good sounding board, you help them start to see what's more important. And as you do that, you also try to help them express what is most important in their giving, and maybe even couple them with people inside the organization who would be the doers, the implementers of what they care most about. And when we do that, we create these deeper, more long-lasting partnerships. So many of the interviews glean from the information I used, and many interviews glean the information I used in the eulogies. But when I look at donor profiles on behalf of various clients, I find too little about those deep propensities, those lifelong patterns. In fact, I find it all over the place, that most profiles aren't really profiles. What I see are a series of contact reports, often filed by different gift officers at different periods and done in a very subjective way. I think, I feel. And so each person is focusing on instinctively what they see. But when you read the various contact reports, it doesn't add up to a kind of a body of insight that would allow you to manage that relationship, and particularly manage a relationship at this critical stage, at relatively late in life, when reflective people are making these profound decisions as to where to allocate their lifelong work and savings. So I would say that one of the things we could do, most of us, to improve as a field is to get a more complete understanding of a forensic interview, not just curiosity, but what are some of the most important questions to ask, or perhaps to put it another way, what are some of the most important facts or insights to glean from our conversations, and to make sure that the answers and responses get logged into the profile so that those relationships can be managed, whether we leave or we go on somewhere, that others can pick up that relationship. We should be developing profiles that allow us to achieve the great objective of fundraising, and that is to optimize the lifelong potential of each and every donor. And we do that, of course, by optimizing their passions, by making them feel of all the places they could give, our organization is the one that is most self-actualizing and fulfilling. So a more complete understanding of what key bits of insight are, some practical, some tactical, some spiritual, some psychological, some emotional. Are we really getting an accurate recording, a logging of personality traits and values indicators that are so important in facilitating philanthropy, particularly estate giving? So I was not an expert, and I'm still not. I didn't help plan estates. I had people around me who were quite expert in more sophisticated instruments. But as you know, about 95% of estate gifts for all causes and purposes, whether it's higher education or medical centers or religious purposes, are in the form of a simple will. So I think there's been a tendency to overstate the technicalities or the technical options for estate giving, and to understate and underplay how we help people articulate and frame their value system and then play back to them. Given these beliefs, given these powerful life lessons, have you thought about X, Y, or Z? Or does this seem to you to truly resonate with what life has taught you to be most important? And the more of this we do, the deeper the conversation, the more genuine the listening, then you get greater openness, and you emerge from this dialogue with a greater sense of collaboration. To be asked to give a eulogy at a donor's funeral is not just an honor, it's an indication of being accepted as a trusted advisor, as someone who will help you make an objective decision, as someone who's not just trying to steer you in a particular direction for self-serving or institution-serving purposes. And again, the right way is the best way in the long run. When we develop a reputation for being an honest, objective facilitator, people become more trusting and more generous, and even share with others how important it is to work with someone like us in framing their estate gift. In fact, word of mouth can be very helpful in and among donor populations, because some listen to each other and some want to learn from the experiences of those who have framed estates before them. So the practical part of just an effective donor profile, before we talk about what's particularly important to do and look for in estate planning, would be these elements. But, and we're happy to talk about that when the time comes, but I think what you'll see buried in these practical, tactical questions is biography or autobiography itself. So for instance, One of my favorite questions is, even when I'm starting to work with a new donor, is, I want to do this the right way. I want to earn your support. I want to listen carefully. I want to take the time to understand you. But to help me do well by you, could you tell me about your most and least positive giving experiences? And in that context, could you tell me to which organization you've given the greatest amount and why? And if you get the answer to that question, you get a compressed biography. You get the backstory to giving. When you understand why people have given disproportionately to certain causes, you get the values that drove that and the life experiences that drove that. And that gives you this great opportunity then to think about how you match those animating passions with a particular ambition of the institution that you represent. So we want to get these basic facts in. And now keep in mind, if you look at the third bullet point, I make a statement that some may be surprised by, and that is that when we assess who are our most viable prospects, we must stop just looking for amounts given here or there, the big gift giver who may have given a big gift here or there, or a major gift here or there. The most important criteria is the number of years that someone has given, the number of years, irrespective of the amount, because that will be highly and most predictive of estate giving. An example I just encountered upon working recently with Northwestern Oklahoma State University and my great colleague Skeeter Bird there. I think he'll attest to the fact that when I was working with the foundation board, I said what I just said with you, and he wrote me a few days later and said, "Jim, it's as if your words came true. We just had a donor give $1 million estate gift who had never given more in total than 2,000 and some dollars over 40 years." And I will predict for those of you who have significant quotients of donors who have given 20 years or more, this is what you will see more of in the next 10 years. And many people would be surprised by it, but you won't. And that is the quiet, modest donor, often giving it very small amounts, delivering to your organization's surprisingly large estate gifts. So years of giving to your organization, I see too little of us attending to people who have given 20, 30, or 40 years and still chasing what we think are more obvious short-term possibilities. And if we continue to do that and miss this opportunity, then again, the great wealth transfer will not be as meaningful to our organizations and we'll never see the likes of it again. So we should be able, just for practical purposes, to mobilize in the coming decade for the future of our organizations to harvest the most likely support from our most loyal donors. All right. Some of this, again, I don't need to go through every point there, but I know people like to have slides and materials after a webinar like this for them to reflect on. So some other important practical elements to have in a donor profile are listed here. And you can think of different ways of asking questions that get you to this point, right? By the way, if you see the second bullet point on this slide, in my personal experience doing interview for multiple clients, people are very impressed when you ask them, what can my client learn from other organizations? Because it suggests a genuine intent to improve continuously, to be non-defensive and open, and say, what can we learn from others? And when I ask that question, I get some wonderful insights into how people feel well treated by other organizations, what in fact made them feel that way. And I'm able to pass on to clients. For this donor, at least, this is incredibly important to them. And they cited this as something they thought other organizations did better. All right. You can't go wrong with the fourth bullet point, people they remember as being most helpful or influential in their career. And you can only imagine how many interviews I've conducted over my career asking that question. I shared yesterday, I was working with an independent school, that it's so touching to me, and I hope anybody here who is a teacher or knows a teacher or has teachers in the family, that I don't care how powerful or successful or wealthy the person, when you ask them the most important influences in their life, it's extremely rare that one of the top three at least one of the top three is not a teacher, right? So this is so important to know when people say these teachers made certain differences and how they made differences, what was important in their teaching or even beyond their teaching. It's so important then to know for the institution to know that people that perform these quiet, generous deeds plant seeds of philanthropy that then years and years, even decades later, bear fruit. And when we help others, we make a profound difference. And so, if you're working for an educational institutions, please show your teachers some love and tell them how important they are to philanthropy in general and to making people more reflective and generous. Right? So, here's some other questions again for your consideration. Now, as we think about the autobiographical interview, the questions we want to ask, these are the things that we should be searching for. Now, you can use different words, but I think you'll get my grasp, and you can come up with any questions that you want. But these are the things that are looking for um, who they are, how their value system was framed, how their character was forged, what they rely on when push comes to shove. These kinds of insights are just genuinely uh, just immense appeal and make people feel so complimented. Some of you know that I led a lot of student discovery exercises when I was in higher education, in which, and I now help clients do the same to help students, to train students to go interview alumni and ask them questions about their animating passions. But what we've learned is the deeper the question. In other words, not just the tactically read our magazine, what do you like about our events? When you go, if you had another day in a week, how would you spend it? What still remains to be done with your life? What would you like to be said about you? What would you want the people that you most admire and love to say about you? When you actually ask those deeper questions, people feel respected and they enjoy the interview and they see in you this willingness to know them at a deeper level. The fact that you reach beyond the normal parameters of giving to try to get at the essence of a person makes a profound impression on reflective people. So, here are just some kinds of things that I think if we sat down with people who had given 20 years or more, people who are, let's say, 65 or over, and just said, we want to learn from your loyalty. It's been so remarkable. You've been so consistent, so dependable. We want to learn how this happened and how you came to be this way so that we can nurture this going forward. And people will spend time with you. But then out of this, you're going to glean bits of information that will lead to future conversations and then eventually lead to the corridor for estate giving, right? Excuse me. So I wanted to share those with you. And again, I know they'll make these available to you, but to give you something to take away. And you can refine these, you can put these in your own words, but I hope what you see in them is a kind of a depth that can be all too often missing from lots of fundraising dialogue and missing from seminars and teaching seminars about fundraising. While these questions apply in this case to estate giving because this moment is so fraught with potential and possibility in the next decade, I think you also see that these questions, as you gain trust with people, can be used in any number of situations. For instance, I run into lots of, when I do training seminars for major gift officers, they say, how do we maintain conversations over the year? How do we maintain contact with people? And I say, well, just once a quarter or, every 6 weeks, send a couple of interesting questions. And that in and of itself, that continuing interest can be a great way, a graceful way of maintaining contact. It can be a great way of you then building deeper and deeper insight. And at the right moment, saying, can I try an idea on you? I remember 3 months ago when you said X, and this new plan came up where we're now going to do Y. Can I show you it? Can I give you the outline of the plan? You see, there we go to our matchmaking, which is the best form of fundraising. All right. Where should our primary purpose be? Are we working on the right prospects? Are we emphasizing the right criteria and determining where our time is best spent? Well, let's not look past the obvious, and that is the current donor. The living donor who has already made a planned gift is, based on our examination of post-campaign numbers, among the most likely to give again. So we tend to think someone's given us an estate gift, they've given and done all they could. And when we treat them like investors, when we engage them in the kind of dialogue that we're talking about, we find that the estate givers, because when you think about it, they have the deepest affinity for that organization based on the commitment they've already had, come back and make late in life gifts or increase the size of their estate or some combination thereof. They have the deepest affinity by virtue of the decision they've made, and we then tend not to treat them like future investors. But they could be under the right circumstances if we proceed along the lines that I suggest. The 20-year donor plus, and the more above 20 years, is the single largest source of estate gifts. And again, don't worry about the amounts given. Remember, some people are innate savers. They live below their means. Try as you might, you won't get them to change their annual gift because they're kind of locked into a pattern. And these are the people that supposedly surprise us when they pass on and leave remarkable estate gifts. The quiet people living below their means and creating a cushion that then is passed on in the form of an estate gift. And just to cite how important 20 years are, some people, you remember that kind of a donor analytical firm. I think it was sold to another company, maybe Blackbaud, but they did some very interesting work that I still look to corroborate my research and see if they agree. Came to the same conclusion that you can't really call a donor committed these days until you have about 20 years in. 20 years. But how many of our organizations are paying attention to the steady growth of 20-year donors? Unfortunately, in our drive to achieve short-term results, we are not putting an emphasis on long-term relationship building, which, once again, as I said earlier, will prove to be the most effective form of fundraising if we stay with it over time, right? So this is when we begin with these people. We begin this autobiographical facilitation. The best way, the best thing for you to do is start writing your own story or thinking through your own story or whatever way you want to do it. And think back to the beginning, what shaped you, who shaped you, why you worked as hard as you did, why you made the decisions, what you learned from your struggles. The more of this you do, the more I can be helpful to you. And most people find this to be a worthwhile exercise, or at least appreciate the effort, right? So this is what the times call for. But to do this and to use the questions that I've posed to you, let's be honest. You just can't run up to somebody and say, tell me all these important facts about you. You have to build trust. I see people send out interviews hoping to fetch plan giving donors by asking these kinds of personal probing questions in a survey instrument. And if you look at the yield from those survey instruments, it's infinitesimal because people look at it and go, well, they're just sending me these questions to actually get me to give them the information for them to come back and ask me for something that they want, right? You see where I'm going is to get to a place where people trust you with important personal information, you have to present yourself, as I said at the outset, as a person of depth, as a broad-minded philanthropic facilitator, not a rapacious short-term gift chaser, right? Not somebody looking for notches in their belt, not somebody working under pressure, even though you may be under pressure, but somebody who is truly trying to understand the roots of their philanthropy and nurture it forward. Oops, I don't know what happened there, but I might have done that. Let's go through these real quick. Ah, like my sound effects? Let's see if I can go here. So, trying to find which slide I was at. All right, let's try this one. I'll try to be very careful with that advanced key. All right, so trust needs to be established. And the work that I'm describing to you can be done by many people. It can be done by gift officers. It can be done by people with background in social science or journalism, people with good interview techniques, volunteers. We're getting lots of board members, foundation boards and governing board members to take on some of these tasks. Some of them find it quite appealing, right? So we give them that work. So think about if you are trying to cover a lot of territory, are there other good interviewers you could recruit? And remember, um, at Georgetown, and then since then, 15 years since then, we've helped any number of educational institutions use young people. I know not everyone here is from an educational institution, but I'm just trying to broaden your imagination as to who you could recruit for this in creating a kind of a discovery cadre, a group of interviewers who could reach out to the people that we have pointed to as being so important. And think about this as well, that as people come of a certain age and frame estate gifts, that as you put together profiles, it should have the makings of the eulogy, whether you're asked to give a eulogy or not. That's a good goal. As you look at that and say, if we were asked to give a eulogy for this particular donor, do we have in our profile adequate information? Is there real insight, or is there a bunch of facts and a bunch of subjective entries that don't really add up to a consistent kind of insightful profile? As I say here, you may never be asked to give one, but I think it's a great way of thinking about developing a research profile, right? And the information gleaned can be used in so many ways, either before the person passes on or after, including, as I said, plaques, bereavement services, citations, speeches, whatever, to have that information and say, we lost someone important to us. This is who he or she was. And to be able to say that with some detail and depth will be impressive to all those who care about the organization and care about maintaining a relationship with it. All right. So gift planning is really cumulative philanthropy. It is us understanding the sum and substance of each life and showing how philanthropy itself becomes a way to take the meaning of our lives and to pass it on to others. So let me move forward here, and in about 15 minutes remaining, open it up to any questions that you might have and see if we can be helpful either in specific answers or maybe clarifying or going into greater detail about something that would be more useful to you. So questions, comments, anything?
Yes, we do have a couple questions, and I encourage other people. We still have a lot of time, so go ahead and put your questions in there. Um, Jim Leah is asking, how do you request a meeting in a way that makes the donor understand that you want to have this deeper conversation? You want to have this type of a conversation. We are so often requesting meetings through email, and I'm not sure how to open the door so that the donor is prepared for both the time and the depth that this type of conversation would entail.
Yeah, great, great. So again, these things can often be different according to the donors, but to say something like we are trying to better understand why we've been the recipient of remarkable loyalty. We see that it has been a phenomenon of a single generation. We hope to inspire it going forward. And we would love to spend time with you to understand the source of your loyalty, to better express our appreciation for it. But the more we understand the nature of loyalty, the more we can identify the seeds of it elsewhere and nurture those seeds going forward. And so we want to learn about how you became philanthropic, what animated your philanthropy, how you made decisions, why you chose us, and why you continue to support us. In other words, you preview as much as you can. Another way of thinking about this, and another approach that we're using with different clients to a high degree of success, is for them to say, we are instituting a new practice, and that is the annual stewardship interview. And we're doing that for all donors who have given gifts of this level and all donors who have given for X number of years or more. And what we are trying to do is to one, understand the nature of the relationship, two, to make sure that you're satisfied, from it, and then from that, see how we can work more closely together in the future, right? So you simply say, as a matter of policy, we're reaching out to you and conducting these interviews. So to your point, you want to say that we want to spend extended time with you. A third variation on this is for a more select group of people to say, we want an oral history or a video history. You're that important to us. And we may want up to 8 hours of interviews. In my ideal world, if I had the right human and financial resources, I would hire a very skilled interviewer, somebody with real emotional depth. And for a subset of important donors, say we want 8 hours of videotape ultimately, and then we can repurpose this in many ways. One, in keeping an archival record of you. Two, having a record that explains your giving. And we can use excerpts of it to motivate and inspire others about giving itself, right? So you can come in at different angles, but you're so right. You have to tell people what it is that you're doing, what's the principle behind it, and ask them, when considering the request, to realize that you want considerable time with them. Now, a sad truth here may be that if it comes from a fundraiser, and they don't know the fundraiser that well, they may see that as a ploy. So it might have to come from a stewardship office or alumni office or some other part of the organization. It may have to come from the president's office. Unfortunately, many people feel ambushed or snuck up on by other fundraisers. And so we see the skittishness wherever we go about any time they reach out to you to show an interest in you, it's usually a ruse for fundraising. So the maladroit actions of others have caused pain for all of us who go about this the right way. And we have to convince people that we're sincere in how we facilitate philanthropy.
So that leads right into another question that a lot of people have liked and posed. Um, this person says, I noticed you mentioned titles sometimes can get in the way of our work. How do you navigate that, especially if a donor sees your email or your office that you work in and assumes that your intent is to chase a gift before they get the chance to go deeper?
Yeah, excellent. Again, I think many of us face this, and some of you may know of the survey that Luis Diaz and I did about the state of the development profession, where we interviewed frontline fundraisers or surveyed them. And one of the questions is, what is your greatest challenge? And by far and away, the vast majority said getting the first appointment. Everywhere I go, I do that same survey in advance so I can customize my presentation. And the same answer comes up over and over again. What's the hardest part of your job? Getting the first appointment. Why is it getting it? People are screening out what they think are ruses, as we said earlier, the gift chaser. Why? Because they've seen too much of it. So, at bare minimum, I think what it entails is writing to the person and saying, this is who I am, this is what I do for a living, but this is how I do it. I am an interviewer. I am someone who spends time listening. I preview the purpose of every meeting. I ask permission before taking the next meeting. In other words, you've got to try to say, you don't want to hide who you are. You don't want to be deceptive, but you want to say, yes, this is my field, but I'm a philanthropic facilitator, and this is how I work, right? So, for instance, those people that are struggling with getting the first appointment sometimes are much more successful if they say to those same people, would you give me 10 minutes on Zoom to introduce myself, tell you who I am, and tell you how I would like to work with you?
I love that you spent a good amount of time talking about stewardship. It's so critical
Oh,
to the work that we do with donors, yet so many powers that be don't see it as a place of investment, unfortunately. And that annual stewardship interview is terrific. We've got a couple other questions that have popped up here. And I mean, I think this is fair, especially the current atmosphere and environment we're in. But given the atmosphere that we're in now, how do you handle conversation that might veer towards politics? How do you tactfully handle that in today's volatile environment?
it's everywhere, just everywhere. I've never seen anything as intense before. And so there are these kind of acid tests, like which side are you on, right? It's what's often behind those questions. Are you with us or against us? So it's everywhere. And I think what you have to do is one, be prepared for it, and two, make the case that your mission is much broader than any particular political party or ideology and offer examples of that. So even at a university where someone might say, you know, have a reputation for being very liberal, you know, I'd be prepared to say, well, you know, there are certain um, areas, disciplines where people are more visible and more valuable and have strong opinions, and that then people assume is how everyone thinks. But in a large university with many different disciplines, we see a range of political outlooks and attitudes. We see very different attitudes in science and technology than we might see in the humanities. And we see among our student body a much wider range of opinions. So we would ask that you not draw your opinion from a few examples in the mass media and work with us to show you how broad-minded we are and how we try to build a truly inclusive community of different points of view and to people of different backgrounds, right? So, but one of the things, Nathan, that we're, again, in the light of these new realities, is to saying to people, one of the most important tools in fundraising these days is what I'm calling an anticipatory FAQ, which is what are the toughest questions we're going to face out there? And rather than asking each gift officer to field them on their own, central advancement or some central authority ought to be coming up with the best, most honest answers to those questions so that when they come up, we're prepared. And when you stand up to a tough question with straight talk and fact, you can turn around reasonable people. But if somebody is a zealot on either side of the equation, you may not be able to, but so be it. I don't think a lot of significant giving comes from people on the wings of any particular ideology, on the far wings of any particular ideology.
Along those same lines, Jim, someone is asking, there's a lot of pressure right now to meet institutional priorities, especially with today's political climate. It seems like this interest you're speaking of really in-depth knowledge of a donor would often lead to a specific giving interest the donor might have that perhaps the institution can't or isn't prepared to deliver on. How would you strike a balance between that?
Yeah, so that is possible. One, I think, you know, in everything that I've said, when you're asking people to, you say people you're going to listen and then you come back to them, you are always trying to propose the intersection of what is strategic for your institution and what is passion for them. You're not sitting down and saying what's important to you, and then I'll go make it happen. You do have to say you are a matchmaker and describe that matchmaking is putting those two elements together. If someone, notwithstanding your efforts to say, I am trying to see if we can find a match between your passions and our capabilities, if the person still comes out with something that's a little too far afield, one of my favorite phrases, and many of my clients have picked up on it, sometimes they say it's their favorite takeaway from a seminar is, I don't want to take your money and disappoint you. I could nod my head and say, yes, we could do that, but we can't. But I'll tell you what, here's the closest approximation of what we can do given what you're asking. Can we try to meet in the middle? Would this work for you? If someone's so bent on getting something done that simply does not fall within your realm of capability, meaning you won't make it happen, you won't be able to steward it, you have an obligation to stop it at that point and say, I don't want to disappoint you. I don't want to take your money. I don't think we can do that. I don't think it's going to work. I don't think it's going to work. I could not be politically acceptable within this organization, whatever it is. Remember, that kind of straight talk can win you credibility over time and cause those kinds of donors to see you then in a very different light. Oh, okay. And they may reflect on what you've said and then come back with something that is more in the middle between what you hope from them and what they hope from you.
Yeah, I think that I was going to echo that same sentiment, Jim. I mean, you can build a lot of credibility. It's so easy for a lot of fundraisers to get sucked in that, wanting to say yes to every gift idea
Yep.
or gift opportunity, but you
Yep.
can build a lot of credibility being just very honest and forthright with those donors.
Yep. Always.
Elizabeth had an interesting, she had a couple questions here, but I was intrigued by this one in regards to institutions, or perhaps, if you're aware of any institutions who share the eulogies or donor biographies with recipients, for, in her example, scholarship recipients. Any examples of that or any thoughts on that approach?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I can't think of any off the top of my head, and I can think of a couple maybes, but I don't want to sit in this venue speculate on something. But when I see really good practitioners, and particularly people in the planned giving space, or gift officers that have been in an institution a long period of time, I see them capture those things. And by the way, I do see at institutions that do things well, that they do have these citations about donors that they've lost, and able to then have wonderful quotes or insights about those donors. It's not just mourning the loss, but it's being able to say something to them that is kind of so revealing that it's riveting. Oh my goodness, what a poignant phrase, right? So I can't say that I know of an institution, but I know a number of fine practitioners who are alert to those possibilities and share that information in ways that in tributes, in public statements and ceremonies, et cetera.
So a lot of questions around, this is going to be our last question because we're almost out of time, but really, how do you go about getting that donor to talk to you, to engage with you? If they've been screening out solicitors, what have you found to be the best strategy to break through that barrier?
A step at a time. And to be specific, remember what they hate is vagueness, because I think vagueness is a trap, or humoring them because I think that's a trap, right? Or shining them on. So, like to meet with you. And here are 3 to 5 questions I'd love to get your answers to. Show them. Would you be willing to share this information? They may say, well, I'll just give you the answers now. Great. But if I were with you, I'd love to ask some follow-up questions. This would just be a start. Why do you want these questions? So we can work with you better, so we can provide you what's most meaningful to you, so we make your giving more meaningful. That's our job. And if I'm a gift officer, I'm going to seize on a point that Nathan says is, I am also a steward. That being a good gift officer means I'm your champion, I'm your advocate before and after giving. The more you share with me, the more I can find the right place for you, and the more I can make sure that your expectations are met.
I think that's a fantastic place to stop the conversation. We did have some questions that we didn't get to. Jim has offered his email address. You can see it on the screen here, jim@langleyinnovations.com. You can reach out to him personally with questions. You can also reach out to Nathan or myself if you have questions about Stelter, our products, or our services. And I just wanted to remind you again, you will get a link to the recording and a PDF of the handouts in an email from me tomorrow. So look for that. And thank you so much, everyone, for attending. We had a little over 200 people on the call with us today. Jim, thank you so much for your time.
My
It was a
pleasure.
really inspiring conversation, I thought. I really enjoyed it. So
Thank you.
thank you so much. And we hope that you all sign up for our webinar next week. Go to your inbox. I'll be sending you an invite in just a couple days. So thanks, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jim.